Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ProgCast. I'm Gregg Bendian, and each episode we are delving into different episodes, different areas of progressive music. There are so many kinds, as you know, and we'll never get to them all, but we're trying. And this week is no different. I have a special guest today. He's a composer, a producer, percussionist, a rhythmist, conceptualist. His name is Merrick Hughes. And I'm very happy to welcome him to the program. Hi, Kris.
Hi, Greg. Hi, guys.
So great that you could do this. Shout out to Andy Partridge for putting us together.
Yeah, good fun. Good for Andy. Yeah.
So, Kris, you have such a diverse musical range, and I'm always interested in creative people who have that kind of reach and wide array of interests. But I always wonder sort of how that happens, what the pathology is of that. And I'd love to know about some of your earliest musical experiences and how you fell in love with music.
My parents used to jive around my living room. They'd put bebop records on, and I mean, both my parents were huge music fans. And so for me, my happiest memories were watching my mum and dad dancing. And I think from that point, I just absolutely fell in love with music. And it was a wide range of stuff. You know, my father would say, well, you know, I'd be listening to the Beatles. He said, well, listen to this Charlie Parker record. And it was mind blowing. You know, and he was like always saying, have you heard this? And there's some classical stuff you need to hear. And there's some turn of the century composers. Have you heard Schoenberg? And it's an astounding array of music. And there's just so much that I absolutely love, and it's never stopped. So my tastes are very, very wide, and I'll go off in that direction and check out some, you know, mad Peruvian nose music at one point. You know, it's very, very wide.
And you never run out of ideas. I think it feeds the fire.
It's a fact. Yeah. Yeah, because you listen to stuff and you're inspired. You question stuff, and how's that done? And who can I speak to that would know how that works? And that's the same in the studio. You hear a record and you think, how have they recorded that? That sounds amazing. You know, and then you learn and you speak to people and you listen in. You think, oh, that must be a certain amount of compression, and maybe there's some special reverbs here. And it's quizzical. You're questioning the whole time. You're trying to find answers, solutions, and then you apply it to what you do. You know, then you can wake up one day and go, well, I'll try this. I'll try flicking that bed spring and clanking that bottle, you know, or whatever it is, you know. Yeah. So the creative need never goes. You just, you know, forever recording things and trying different things out. And then you work with people and you say, have you tried this? Have you thought of doing this? And they're going, oh, that's amazing. Show us what you mean, you know. So it never ends.
So were you one of those people who was fascinated with the 60s psychedelic music?
Yeah. I think the first time I heard a wah-wah guitar, or a bit of guitar with backwards guitar or heavy feedback guitars, essentially. Yeah, they were for me. They were the voice, you know. And then obviously synthesizers a bit later. Synthesizers just completely, and polysynths where you could be playing chords. There was a whole wall of sound, not perhaps just a sort of mono lead, but some kind of big wall of sound. Just mind-blowing, fascinating stuff.
And when you came on the scene in, I guess, late 70s, early 80s, there was a real big movement for synth pop, right?
There was, yeah. A lot of people, I think there was a kind of movement against synths and the fact they were kind of getting in the way, and you know, it should be, you know, perhaps a Hammond organ as a keyboard, or a farfisa, but it's guitars and drums and bass in synths. You know, what the hell are they? But I just thought they were amazing. You know, for the first, actually, you know, switched on Bach, Walter, Wendy Carlos. I mean, I remember the first time I heard that, I couldn't believe it. You know, that whole sense of electronica, I just loved it from day one. You know.
And that's been a big part of your output, right?
I can't get away from synths, yeah. Programming synths and just generally seeing what they do. And these days it's more things like Eurorack and modular synths or simulations of modular synths. You know, there's a fantastic bit of software. I won't plug anything specifically, but there's an amazing kind of Eurorec model in soft, which is fantastic. And you can generate stuff. You know, you can make generative music for weeks on end. And I sit there sort of calculating and doing mad maths and adding bits and modules together. It's indeed, there's a whole community that does it. It's not unique what I'm doing, but I love it. I find it absolutely fascinating.
Are you a science fiction fan?
Yeah.
Is there a connection?
There has to be a connection when you think about early soundtrack from Theremin and beyond. You know, this whole need to make some otherworldly, wobbly soundtrack. Yeah, I find it humorous and brilliant all in one. You know, so I'm drawn to it. We spoke before about TV programs like Space Patrol, which were, you know, a black and white puppet show when I was a kid, and the sort of soundtrack and the sort of music to that. I had no idea how that was made, what kind of keyboards or electronica they were using, but it's extraordinary, you know. So I was drawn to that, you know, and I was what, 9 or 10 years watching Space Patrol. I know that I've talked to Andy Partridge about that, and he is a huge advocate, and you know, if you push him, he'll do the impression of all the different characters in it as well, you know.
Well, when he was on this program, he went into detail about each of the characters.
It doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And we also discussed the electronic soundtrack. You know, it's funny how you run into electronica early on. I had a very visceral experience, which is, you may recall, a British film. I don't know if it was a Hammer film, but it's Roddy McDowall, Gail Honeycutt, a few other people, and it's a horror film called Legend of Hell House.
Don't know it.
All electronic score.
Oh, wow.
And couldn't be more terrifying. There's not one normal sound on that soundtrack, and it just puts you on edge the whole time.
You know the Saragossa Manuscript film?
Yeah.
Because some of the electronic music on that is bonkers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, it's interesting to me too, because it starts really with tape manipulation first. You know, the early days where you have Pierre Schaeffer and Varese and guys, you know, working on how can we treat music concrete to create another world.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I'm a big Zappa fan, and I know, you know, he in turn was a huge Edgar Varese nut, you know. I mean, and there's an album yet to come out where he's conducted and arranged a whole bunch of Varese pieces, which I'm really looking forward to hearing at some point. But they were done with the Ensemble Moderne, so there'll be beautiful, I don't doubt, beautiful recordings.
I actually, as a teenager, attended a Zappa Presents Varese concert.
Amazing.
And it just so happens I have found the program.
Aha. This is great, Greg. This is absolutely brilliant.
Now,
my word.
Sorry to those who are audio only, but I'll open it up.
Oh,
now,
man.
I would say, I want everyone to know, this concert was recorded and it's on YouTube, tribute to Edgar Varese, hosted by Frank Zappa. Zappa chose the program and paid for the event.
Right.
And as you can see, it's ionization, it's all the hits.
Yeah, all the big ones.
It's all the singles.
So that's 81, yeah?
It is April 17th, 1981. You can hear the audience totally not dealing with it in the recording. At one point, he has to tell them to shut up.
Yeah.
But he would come out, he'd introduce each piece. And he was the person that got me into Varese.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a percussionist in high school, you know, studying classical and playing trap set, et cetera.
Did you enjoy that?
I did. Orchestral percussion became boring because, you wait around so much to go ding.
Yeah. And that's no joke. That is true, isn't it? You do count bars for days and then go ding.
Yeah, or go boom, and so I feel like I could play more than that. It would be great.
Yeah.
So ionization, where it's all percussion,
Yeah.
that was life-changing. And it was really through Zappa. And the fact that he was promoting, I don't know if people realize how much he was promoting Varese to try to get people to listen to Varese. And since you're a fan, I'll tell you one little anecdote. So I did meet him that night just to say thank you for that. But years later, when he started doing the synclavier stuff, Perfect Stranger came out.
Yeah.
And it was recorded by Boulez, Ensemble into Contemporain. And then it was premiered in New York by the Juilliard students.
Mm-hmm.
And he showed up with Gail and was in no hurry to leave, came backstage and was really interacting with the students. So I couldn't pass up the opportunity. And I went up to him, I said, Frank, really big fan. You turned me on to Varese. I got to know, what's your favorite Varese piece?
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm expecting a different answer. And he says to me, Octandre. And I said, Octandre, really? Because I would have thought for you it would be Désert, because it was important for him when he heard that as a kid, that he was living in the desert.
Sure.
And hearing it. And he said, no, Octandre has everything you'd want from a Varese piece.
Great.
And that was it. That was the interaction.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, the opportunity I had to meet Frank Zappa was at Wembley in 80. And was it 80 or 88? I can't remember. And I was with a bunch of people, so I got backstage and met various band members, and he sort of wandered in, and I stood there and I thought, I'll be doing that thing he did when he said to Varese, I think you're great, and everything goes, and you want to have an encyclopedic conversation, but all you're about to come out with is, I think you're marvelous, or something absurd like that. And so I didn't. I just stood there and chatted to other people. I saw he was wandering around. So that was a moment where, on some level, I'm glad I didn't actually say anything. It was just like, well, I know he's great. That'll do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even just being alive at the same time as these guys.
And I was my first gig, mother's gig, was the Albert Hall. So I was at the Albert Hall when the guy was shouting at the end of the gig, and he tells him to stop shouting, you'll hurt your throat.
And is that also where Don played Louie Louie on the organ there?
Did it? The recordings, and I think. Oh
no, that's 80 though.
No,
wait, no, Mothers. No. Okay.
Yeah, no. Dom did get up and did play Louie Louie on the organ. It was seriously loud and absurd, but I'm not sure whether that little bit of distorted organ was the time before, because they played the Albert Hall at the time before that. But I'm sure there'll be people that will know for certain. But yes, I was there when they played Louie Louie. Yeah.
Wow.
That was my first encounter.
So what were the shows that you saw around that time that changed your musical mind?
That was definitely one. I remember seeing Santana. They played the Albert Hall, and they were sensational. I mean, it was just the energy level of it, the kind of bright and brash, funky nature of it was extraordinary. A bit later, I saw James Brown in London. That was remarkable. Tony Williams I saw live in London, and that was sensational. Being a drummer and watching some of your heroes. I never got to see Cream live. I've seen Ginger Baker play live, but never the Cream. He's a phenomenal guy. Little Feat. I saw Little Feat the first time they played in England, I believe, was at the Manchester Free Trade Hall. So been living in London at the time, drove up to Manchester, and I remember that was an astounding gig. I remember them playing and Lowell George just clicking on a little compressor pedal and playing some slide, and hearing that tone in the room, it just unbelievable. Yeah. Just trying to think what else. I saw the Tubes do their big extravaganza in Hammersmith. I saw Pink Floyd a whole bunch of times. Saw Pink Floyd at the Albert Hall. Saw Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young at the Albert Hall. Saw Springsteen in '75. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the old grandees, really. Yeah.
But quite a diverse range there.
Yeah, I saw Todd Rundgren play in London as well, but that was with that was the kind of Ra setup.
Okay, yeah, I saw that tour.
The dry ice guitar, the dry ice Strat. Yeah, it was good. A fantastic band, unbelievable players, amazing. And so for a long time, Todd was a major player as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he still is, but I probably listen to his stuff a little less these days. But there was a time when I was just absolute Todd nutcase, you know.
Well, you're not alone.
I mean, he's that good, you know. He's that good. He's an amazing producer as well. Amazing singer. I mean, all around. He's, you know, and a tech head as well, you know.
Well, yeah. And in fact, his most recent stuff, there's been a lot of electronica.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's good at it too. You know, he gets it. It's not like some old bluff. It's like real, you know.
Well, because at the end of the day, you have to use your ears to choose interesting sounds.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's a certain thing where you've got to use something else to actually, you can recognize something that you find interesting, but then to apply the nature of what that might be or what that might mean in order to do work and then have it express something you're feeling. That process, you know, is unbelievably frustrating, you know, because you can often be almost at something good and you come back the next day and you go, yeah, I know it's not good enough. It's all right, but, you know, it's not mind-blowing. It's like an exploration of somebody else's work and you've taken it apart and reconstructed it for your own benefit, but it's not really truly inventive. It's kind of research work. You're kind of learning what you're doing and then you kind of end up with a result, but it might not be anything mind-blowing. So these will get put on the shelf of things to come back to and try and grapple with later.
Your favorite Todd stuff?
Oh man, I remember the day I bought Todd, the double album, and I'd been such an advocate of Wizard of True Star. I just thought that album was so chaotic and beautiful and a mess and sublime. It was just extraordinary record. And then I remember coming home and I bought Todd. I couldn't wait to get it home and I put it on. And about halfway through side one, I sort of fell asleep and I thought, oh, this is so bad. And then realized it's absolutely, you know, in the coming weeks, I realized it's a masterpiece. It's amazing. But there's this strange place where I wanted it to be like Wizard of True Star Part 2. And of course it's not, it's its own story. And I was bitterly disappointed. And then about a month later, this is the best thing anyone's ever done. You know, it's one of those things. And I also did that regularly with Steely Dan. I remember being absolutely loving Pretzel Logic, thinking that was so superbly put together, this kind of sort of rock, but kind of, there's a kind of softness and a tongue-in-cheekness, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on that record. And then, you know, Asia, I thought, what the hell's this? You know, and it was about a week later, I went, oh, okay, I get it. This is probably one of the best records ever made, ever, in the history of making records. But it's this strange little contour where music was being so creatively different and things were sort of advancing at such a rate. in that period that I kind of, yeah, that period of Steely Dan, that period of Todd Rundgren, I suppose 70, from sort of 73-ish, I don't know, somewhere around the area. That's probably my favorite Todd period.
And I think
that doesn't mean to say that the stuff he's doing now isn't great. I'm just saying, for me, that was a vital period for me.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a vital period for so many of the bands that we are into. But I was going to say that I think that sensation you're describing of being completely bollocksed by what you're hearing the first time is that we're catching up to what they're doing. You know, I always had that.
Right. That's the right way. That's the right way. They've gone out there and been amazing, way ahead of the pack. You know, and you learn that quite often that's the stuff you go, oh, give me the stuff I don't get just yet. You know, I remember the first time I heard Bitches Brew, Miles. I mean, there was an indication that something odd was going on, but I had no idea. You know, and I heard that, thought, you know, oh my word. You know, because you get to hear Kind of Blue and you get to kind of think, you know, about cool jazz on some level. And then something like that comes like that, you go, oh, my word, what's all this? And then you're off on a world, you know, it's a universe in itself.
It's the beginning of jazz rock.
Yeah.
You know,
I remember seeing Herbie Hancock at Hammersmith when he was, you know, promoting his big Headhunters album. And they did that whole record and that whole kind of genre live. I remember watching the drummer just being absolutely blown away, because it's really beautifully tight, beautifully expressed funk playing, and the economies of it are amazing. And then you've got everybody else going funking like mad, and he's actually holding this beautiful sense of restraint. Fantastic band. Yeah.
Harvey Mason.
Indeed. But Harvey Mason, but the guy who played on the record, or certainly played live, was another guy called, I think, Michael, he's called Michael White.
Mike Clark.
Mike Clark, that's it, yeah. I think when I saw it, it was Mike Clark playing, and I just, amazing.
Yeah, that's been told to me that style of drumming originated in the Bay Area.
Is that right?
And it's called the Oakland Stroke.
Great, I'm writing that down. It's
all about the ghost notes.
Yeah, of course. Let me just write that down. Talk to your listeners. I'm writing this down.
But that being said, you know, the Tony Thunder Smith from the Jan Hammer Group, another version of that.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you know, it's rudimental on one level. You know, there's a lot of 5-stroke rolls and things like that. But it's I don't know that it's actually coming out of Tony Williams. In many ways, it was a sort of separate, because Tony wasn't really that kind of player.
No.
You know, this was a sort of almost post James Brown thing that was coming out of Cobham.
Yes.
Too.
Yeah. And I saw, I remember seeing Return to Forever. And
Lenny.
I think Lenny. And I remember, I think the first time I saw a drummer that was, I may be wrong, but he had cymbals high up, and he was kind of doing whatever he was doing. And all of a sudden he'd just change and be doing it the other way around. Like it was equally capable in either way around. I just remember watching, thinking, my God, how did you do that? Extraordinary. Yeah.
I remember seeing guys like Billy who ambidextrous.
Sure.
You better be able to do with your left what you can do with your right, and vice versa.
Yeah. And I suppose there was when I saw Lenny White doing that, there was probably a little moment where he was set up to be able to do that for everyone to see. And it was, you know, it was obvious. I'll tell you another drummer that I couldn't believe was Narada. I saw him live with the Mahavishnu Orchestra.
The large group.
I couldn't believe how good he was. As that album, I think it's Visions of the Emerald Beyond. His drumming, I think it's that album, or
Oh, he's on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think some of the drumming on that is just extraordinary, and it's seriously powerful. It's not like tapping in this kind of little place. It's thunderous.
Well, I knew that he was hitting hard, and I was interviewing Jean-Luc Ponty, who was in that band. And I said, Jean-Luc, you've played with a lot of drummers. Who was the loudest drummer you ever played with?
And he said Narada.
Couldn't believe how loud Narada was,
Yeah.
But also had that tight Ghost thing too,
Yeah.
And was a kid,
he was a young'un. Yeah. So do you think his playing at that point came with a kind of brattish, fresh out the box kind of thing?
And the job was to come in and play a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
So, John needed a drummer that was going to kick like that. He had it with Billy. And the funny thing about Narada that I like too is, there's the Cobham thing, the post-funky thing, but he's also a big Mitch guy.
Okay.
He strikes me as like a very flourishy, kind of very wide open drummer like Mitch Mitchell.
Yeah.
And
so is Mitch a hero of yours?
Well, sure.
Yeah.
Just the notion that you had Coltrane had Elvin.
Yeah.
And, Hendrix needed Mitch.
Yeah. I think he did. Possibly weighs more than Buddy.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I've got anything against Buddy Miles's playing, but I just think that when he was with Mitch, it just used to be incendiary more. Just.
Oh yeah.
You listen to Manic Depression, and the drumming and the guitaring. It's all the same piece of voice. It all just comes banging at you. Amazing.
Yeah, the letting the drummer have some,
as they say. Yeah.
And the guitar, I always felt like there was a guitar drum thing the way there was a sax drum thing, and that's the bass player would hold it down.
Yeah.
And then these guys would go. And of course, Miles let Tony play whatever he wanted. And so we were, that was an explosion. It was an explosion. And so when did you start drumming?
Well, as a kid, I got my first kit when I was about 13, and I was in classically high school bands and, just enjoying doing odd gigs and bits and pieces, and loved drumming, but never really, there was a part of me which goes, I love all this. But I want to get this into the studio more than I want to do this live at this point. And I guess I was 18, 19, 20. And I just got more and more opportunities to do bits of sessions and all sorts of things like that. And I always watched the guys behind the glass thinking, what are those guys doing? It always looks really interesting to me. They're doing all this and they're doing and pointing at the monitors and that whole bit. And I'd be sitting there watching, thinking, I want to be in there. And so when I got the opportunity to be in there and do some producing and some engineering, I just absolutely bored everybody asking a million questions. So how does that work? How do you channel that? What is this? And just, did that day in, day out, hassling engineers and how do you get a hi-hat sound and what does that do? And what kind of mic would you use for, just unbelievable sort of question head. And then weirdly, when I met Adam Ant, I was kind of heading towards engineering and producing and not playing. And I won't go into the whole detail, but as chance encounter, he said, well, if you I don't know who you are, but if you think you're any good, why don't you come and produce us? We're trying to cut a record. We need to get a record done real soon. And it was one of those weird things where we went into the studio by the end of the week and cut a few tracks. And I still wasn't drumming. I didn't drum on those. I thought, I've got more than enough on my plate dealing with Adam and the nature of what he wanted. So I just, I don't even know if they knew I drummed, to be honest, when we cut the first couple of tunes. And it was a bit later when he asked me to come down to some auditions. To audition, he wanted a couple of drummers.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because that's an unusual thing at that time in Brit pop, double drumming.
Well, it's two things are meeting at this point. One is Adam. I had a conversation with Adam, very, very early days, and he said, "Yeah, I just want something that's tribal. And I just want something that's kind of vital, and it's got this whole kind of well, it's a drum beat. It's a Burundi thing. You probably don't know." And I said, "I've got the original French field recordings of the Burundi, those guys. I mean, I get it. I mean, I get the difference between the carrier and the bits of punctuation, And I think on one level he's quite relieved that someone kind of went, yeah, I know what you're on about. And I said, yeah, and I sort of imitated the thing, and he was like thrilled. So that was one thing. And then he said, well, I want sort of a big noise. I want a big racket. And I was aware of double drums, like obviously, say in Zappa's band, you've got a classic example of, an amazing example of double drums. So I was thinking that, and so we were talking about auditioning drummers to come down, and we had a couple of kits set up, and someone would come in to do some drumming, and I'd say, well, try it like this. Let's get a thing like this. And by the end of the day, we kind of settled on one guy. And Adam just turned, and kind of we were leaving, and Adam just turned to me and said, "Oh, why don't you do it? Why don't you play?" So I went, "Oh, okay." I really hadn't thought about playing live or being in the group or any of that sort of thing. So I said, "Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll do that." And that was it. So I then started, playing drums, day in, day out, rehearsing, and then going out on tour. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. But that's my first real live drums gig, other than high school bands and a few bits and pieces. So to long-windedly answer your question, yeah, Ants, late 79, early 80s.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, I mean, at that point, you had double drumming going on in Genesis.
Indeed.
There was double drumming on Bitches Brew.
Indeed. Yeah. It's great, isn't it?
I've done it. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
But, but let's talk about that a little bit, because you got to kind of figure it out.
Yeah. Well, there's two versions of that, isn't there? There's one version where for the piece of music, you'll have one drummer that is just gonna do what they do because they're feeling what they're doing, and they just expect the other guy to just do what they do, and it's going to work or not. And sometimes that does, and sometimes it's awful. And then you get the other version, which is like, when I do this, you do that, and we'll see how that works. I mean, I saw Steely Dan live in London when they had two drummers, and it was Jeff Porcaro was one of them, and Jim Hodder maybe. And I remember watching that, and they did a whole Endis piece of the show where they played for some time, and I was watching thinking, yeah, they will have worked that out. There's not a cat and hell's chance they're just jamming that. It's far too sophisticated. And the sort of beat they were sort of holding back on and then just, exploding away from and then coming back to was just so class. So yeah, I've seen double drummers be amazing and been envious of it, So yeah, so for the Ants, it just felt like, yeah, let's take that into a pop realm and do a kind of Burundi jumpy kind of thing and see where that goes. And I mean, that just connected with a bunch of other things culturally that was happening, and that group made some successful pop records, but of which the drums was a part of the signature of it.
Well, that whole scene is interesting to me from a drum aspect, and I'll tell you really what I mean is that, groups like Japan,
Yeah.
with Steve Jensen, just Jansen. So interesting to me that drums are now becoming part of the composition.
Yes.
Drums are now becoming part of the fabric, not only a support.
Yes.
And this, I'm sure everybody knew this was happening in Zappa. He always had a percussionist. Sometimes there were two drummers.
Yeah.
But so what's going on around you? You talk about sort of the culture and the scene of that synth pop scene with rhythm, because there's programming now. You're on the early Lindrum tip, all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember seeing an advert for an LM1, the original, the first Lindrum, and I heard it and I thought, in fact, there's a video of Stevie Wonder programming one, and he's, needless to say, he's just doing it by, how he's finding it all, and he's doing it all. And I remember hearing that thinking, oh my word, that's extraordinary. You can program something that sounds, naive thought actually, but at the time I thought, you can program something that sounds like real drums. They don't, but they were clearly the closest thing to that. And the idea that you could have the drum rhythm change at this point, you could chain all the bars together. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. So when I got my first Lin, I just spent months programming chains and different shapes and different angles, and then applying that to tracks, and managed to get one LM1 track on an Ants record. On Kings of the Wild Frontier, there's a track which is an LM1. It's probably obvious when you hear it now, but at the time I thought it all sounded like, it's a cowboy tune, so it's quite easy for the drum machine to do faultlessly, less easy for the guys to do. So it was one of those fun things where we used a Lin machine.
Did you ever incorporate programmed stuff with live stuff on stage?
The Tears for Fears did. The Ants didn't. No, it was always just raw coming out at you. No tapes, no programming.
Were you fond at all of the Simmons or any of those pad triggers?
Loved them. Yeah. In fact, I got, there's a fair amount of Simmons and triggery on the Hurting, the Tears for Fears album, the Hurting. Yeah, but sitting there forever trying to get the right amount of envelope and decay and pitch bend and all those things was just mind-blowing, beautiful.
And the fact that you could tune them,
I know. You could be sitting there after the event listening to a track that's been laid down to the click or whatever, and then find that your tom-toms were hideous in terms of their pitch against the key of the music. And you could sit there for ages readjusting them and then running the print again with the right pitches. It seems obvious these days, but at the time it was kind of cutting edge stuff. So what it was like. Sitting there with an emulator, pressing a key and hearing a cello coming out. It seems like obvious now, but at the time it was like, wow, you can do that.
Well, you did early Fairlight too, right?
Yeah, I had a series of Fairlights. I think the amount of money I spent on Fairlights, I could have bought a small country. Unbelievable. But somebody said, oh, you only got to have one hit with this, and it's all worth it. I don't mean that in the arrogant sense, but it's just that it ended up that we had successful records, and a lot of it was Fairlight. So, yeah.
Oh, so what's the Fairlight on?
Oh, Fairlights. There's Fairlight on Shout.
Oh, there is.
Yeah, that's quite a large amount of that ticking away is. There's Fairlight, Drumulator, and LM2 on Shout. So there's a combination of, and also at that stage there was also the idea of how do we sync all these, The whole notion of MIDI clock and what boxes were going to read a piece of Simpty stripe on a tape, and how that was going to come out as click. All that stuff was, young and went wrong a lot of the time, and took forever. It was rarely quick.
You were in the trenches.
Yeah. And I think of being in the trenches in a humorous sense, that the guys I was with, we were in the trenches battling against something, but in the wider sense, that's a fairly tricky notion, actually being in the trenches. So with respect to those that have been in trenches and had a foul time. But yeah, in our bubble, we were working, trying to get things we thought were important at the time.
Well, because there's also this notion of the music of your time,
mm-hmm.
right? The music of the moment. And I've been thinking, in getting ready to speak with you, I've been thinking a lot about synth pop and that sort of moment in time where, well, an acoustic guitar is just not going to do.
Yeah.
A upright bass is just not going to be the thing, because that was this other world. And that's why I sort of mentioned the sci-fi connection, but I'm also thinking the digital explosion that happens in the early 80s, and the ability to use machines to express human things.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, when you say perhaps in a certain environment, a musical environment, an acoustic guitar would just seem woefully wrong. Actually, I came across that with real drums, which is a very odd one. But I remember we'd have, I think particularly with the Tears for Fears period of recording, the early period, where it just felt like somebody, hacking their way through the sort of boof, baff thing on a real drum kit, which ordinarily would be very expressive and very exciting, was not as good as something which was absolutely mechanical and would never fail. So there's quite a lot of records where trying to put, and I did it many times where the drummer would say, well, can I put some drums on it now? It'll have this human kind of thing. I'd be hearing it going, yeah, it's too human. It's got these sort of drum fills that are all a bit saying nothing and doing nothing, and is missing the point. And this should be much more angular and clearly not human. Oh, well, it's obviously human in terms of the thinking, but the practice of where beats lie isn't human. It's another side of the brain. So you started to devise and program drum fills which no longer tried to imitate a drummer going dush. You get these angular, crazy bits of punctuation, which were not trying to sound like a human drummer. And that area I found really, once it was out of imitation and into its own realm, I found that really exciting.
Is it about the sound of industry or machinery?
For me, to a degree, the thing I liked about, I suppose, disco music, if you will, and machinery music, it's not, for me personally, it's not so much that it's industry, it's the fact that it's reliable. The beat doesn't let you down. It stays at the beat, at the tempo you set it at, and it will continue. And once you know that's reliable, you can relax. It's a much more relaxing experience when the beat is just given. It makes there's no airs and graces to it. It just does a thing, and you kind of like it or not. For synth pop music, some of that I think is really important. What you're supposed to be really paying attention to is perhaps the lead synths and the quirky way the guy or girl is singing. Doesn't seem, some of that doesn't have room for real drums for me, or at that point.
Well, does it sort of become this texture does not fit with this other texture? I mean, we're trying to create a modernist, futurist kind of sound world.
Yeah, certainly stuff becomes outmoded. Yeah. definitely.
Kris, is there a connection between synth pop and minimalism?
For me, I should write the book on the connection between the two. Oh man, my father, God bless him, took me to see Steve Reich play in 1972. It was the first performance of drumming in Europe. It had been performed in America, but here it hadn't been performed. It was the first. It was performed at the Hayward Gallery on the South Bank in London.
And your dad was already hip to that?
Very much. My dad was part of a kind of art movement. It was a systems art movement. It was minimalist painting, and there was a political edge to it. And Steve Reich came over, and there's a whole world of musicians and painters and artists that were all involved at that point. My father was central to that. So he took me to see this, and some of his students he'd been talking to, postgrad students at the time, said, there's a record you need to hear. It's Rainbow in Curved Air, Terry Riley. And I remember going with my father to a specialist vinyl import shop. And we bought this record. We got it back and put it on. And I couldn't believe it. It just, overnight, I thought, okay, I get this. This is sensational, you know. So yeah, profoundly important, Steve Reich and Terry Riley. I suppose 71, 72, something like that period. Yeah, profoundly important. And the idea that pop music could move from a kind of very filled up, jangly, loads of guitars, loads of racket, into something which was like, Tainted Love, where there's so much air in that record. You can hear everything. You can hear into it. There's almost no mystery. It's going, come, pay attention, have a little listen. There's this synth here. There's that little beat here. It's all for you to hear, and there's not a lot of it. So there's a minimalist aspect to that, which I went, oh, I love this. Trying to get it so that it's got the right amount of interest, and it not being just kind of like, well, there's a synth and it's a bit boring. Getting that balancing act right is hard. But if you get it right, it's phenomenal.
Well, it's a kind of counterpoint, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I mean, you might grasp that, you might not, you might just think it's kind of quite a nice, pleasant set of bips and bops going by, or you might look at it and go, well, that particular synth actually relates rhythmically against this little bass peeping thing, you know, and you can, to do the analysis and find that people have actually spent time putting things, constructing it in a different way, And I guess that also comes at the time when people were multi-tracking. So it was easy to lay down a drum box and then invent something on that and hear what that was like, and then, cut a bit out and put another bit in here. It's not, I don't imagine it was like 5 or 6 synth guys all sitting around doing their bit at the same time. I mean, there were examples of that, but I would imagine in the case of it being studio stuff, it'd be like 1 or 2 heads on it. I guess you would have got the synth duos at that point, where there's just a couple of guys who are in the same mindset going, yeah, let's try that and do that. Different approach.
Well, you mentioned the drum boxes, so I should ask if those were around, if you experimented with them, because, things like There's a Riot Going On by Sly,
Indeed.
Where he's doing all these crazy drum programming things.
Yeah. I mean, you think about, it's a funny argument I can remember having, because I remember people who were resistant to the idea of how could a drum box have any kind of soul or feel at all, because perhaps the only drum boxes they'd come across were the ones where you could press, mambo, foxtrot, slow rock and roll, and it'd be like this cacophony, and it'd be like, well, that's not music, that's just silly. People who held that view, I didn't, but I knew lots of people who thought, well, that's just, pointless clicking herbietry. It's of no value. But you try arguing with people about Family Affair, one of the most amazing records ever made. How soulful do you have to be? And there's a drum machine at the helm. So I think I win the argument there, guys. Listen to that record, drum machine.
Great example.
And it's endless. And it's endless. There were so many records, pioneering records. you know, Timmy Thomas is another one. That kind of box and organ, just unbelievable.
And there's a bunch of drum box on the Todd album you mentioned.
Yes, there is. And yes, there really is. And there's a particular segue, which I've included on my playlist, where the drum box, I think, changes tempo and dries out. There's a reverb on it, and it dries out and comes and launches into another track. Moment of genius, Todd. Absolutely.
That's is that Useless Begging into Sidewalk Cafe?
Yeah. Greg, is that not a moment in recording history? Oh, unbelievable.
Yeah, man.
It's unbelievably simple to do, but who did it, you know?
Yeah. I like the idea of the John Henry story of, you know, the man versus machine. And then I also like cyborg stuff. So, you know, that kind of connection.
Yeah.
I was once talking to Billy Hart, the great jazz drummer, and I asked him about drum programming and how it's influencing current drum styles. Because as you know, there's a huge movement now of drummers, many from LA, but from other areas, who are playing like that.
Yeah.
So it becomes this chicken egg thing, and this thing of building and changing and growing, and one comes and influences the other, but then that influences the next thing. And this continuity, this continuum, for us drummers, I find it fascinating, because I want to know about things I would never think of.
Yeah. But it's also, there's an athleticism too. It's like some guy runs a 4-minute mile, then everyone goes, oh, we can do that. Humans can do that. And it's like a drummer will do something insane on a bass drum pedal. And then a whole bunch of other drummers will go, oh, I get it. That can be done. And before long, the kind of the nature of listening and fathoming out and then being able to improve and continue the evolution. I mean, it's hit some amazing marks, you know. You think about the level of, the general level of expertise in drumming these days, as opposed to, you know, a couple of pop guys back in the 60s, you know.
I do. I marvel at the progressive metal drummers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's another discipline altogether, isn't it? I mean, yeah. You know, especially when you're expressing something that powerful and the bass drum sounds like a small mahogany ball hitting the floor. It's extraordinary. Yeah. And these little bass drums are rattling away at you. It's phenomenal. I mean, who would have thought that would be that powerful an expression? But it is.
I wanted to ask you about Tears for Fears.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
How does that get started for you?
I was at Phonogram Records visiting Dave Bates, who was the A&R guy for Tears for Fears. And there'd been, and this story, you know, this story is how I remember it. Other people have different versions of this, but and I talked to Roland about this, and I think he's pretty much thinks the same. But as I remember it, there'd been a discussion where Roland and Kurt had recorded a couple of tracks for the label. And I think Roland in particular wasn't particularly thrilled with how they turned out. And I think there was some talk that the record company thought they were good enough and it was all going to be, it'll be fine, Roland, don't worry, we'll put these out. And I don't think he was very young, and I don't think he had any voice to really argue against the label. And there was a kind of discussion going on, and Dave, I was passing by, and Dave said, hey, have a quick word with Roland. He's a guy, he's got a group we're looking at signing and working with and recording and blah, 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 blah. Have a word. So I chatted to him and I listened to his concerns, and we just chatted for a bit, and, you know, handed the phone back. And then a bit later, when it was, they were looking for people to work with the band to do some recordings, Roland said, yeah, I'd like to meet and work with that guy I spoke to on the phone. So I ended up going and meeting them, and we got an okay. It was, cordial. And we got into the studio all these things happened so quickly. We met, and then the record company said, yeah, let's get you guys together in the studio. And we went to Britannia Row studio in London, and we recorded two tracks, Mad World, and I think it was Memories Fade. I think those two tracks. And we just got on, and we thought, oh yeah, this should work. This is going to be good. And then that got sort of developed into doing an album. So it was, quite different from, say, working with the Ants, which was raucous and brash and let's get this done super quick. And there was a sort of an impatience to it, and which was great. Tears for Fears was a much more considered thing. We spent so much time thinking about how things might work and how something might be regarded as modern or different or an alternative way of doing something. So Kurt and Roland were both very hip to the idea of things being cleaner, or maybe a couple of things would be double tracked, so it could be slightly like a piano, but it could be a flute. They were very into the idea of the sculpting of sound and how rhythm could work. So, and largely minimal, and they weren't, they came from a sort of teenage guitar band, but I think Roland in particular was quite happy to pursue all these modern keyboards that were coming along. He felt that was a much more expressive kind of set of tones. And of course, I was there with him going, yeah, of course, this is great. Have you tried this?
Were you facilitating that for them?
Yes, to some degree, but things were happening at the same time. So we'd say, okay, why don't we just get in an Oberheim and have a toy with that and see how that works, and see if we can sequence that, or does that connect with MIDI? So a lot of it, it was a bit like black box industry. We need a box that links that keyboard to that. And has anyone done anything? And the MIDI was kind of around, but how do we trigger that? And sampling was just coming along. So I was very much into the whole, how do we get this thing done? And they were very into, can we do this? So we just kind of worked it out together, really.
But at the end of the day, it's about songwriting, isn't it?
It is, actually. Yeah. The opening sentence here is actually, song is king. It is the king. It does. You can do things that are, that float about for hours and can be atmospheric and be amazing for a science fiction film. Wonderment. But at the end of the day, you get a killer 3-minute song, and you could play that on ukuleles. I know that sounds ironic, but, except there's a few examples. I don't think Purple Haze on tuba would be particularly great. There's certain things that are specific, but it's about the song 9 times out of 10.
We talk about the hurting. We're talking about 1983. I'm wondering, around that time, were you guys aware of XTC?
I was, yeah. I'd been working at Virgin. I was working at Virgin Records from 1973. So yeah, I was very aware of them. Yeah. Oh yeah. XTC, unbelievably important. Yes, incredibly important. I played No Language in Our Lungs. I played that to McCartney. I said, I don't know if you've heard this, but you need to hear this because this is so great. Yeah. And he went, yeah. And he was taken by it because it's a tour de force. That's a fantastic bit of work. And, it's got Paul, it's got arpeggios in it. It's a fantastic song.
And I had Dave Gregory on this program. And
How was Dave? Was he good?
The best. Yeah, he's great.
He's great, isn't he?
In fact, he's coming back on to discuss the 50th anniversary of Nursery Crime by Genesis. So
Oh my word.
That's fun because he's a geek, as much a geek about that as I am.
Yeah.
But yeah, No Language. I always say the instrumental interlude.
Yeah.
Just going up and up
I know.
and then just
Yeah.
And the whole out at that point, from that point on is just so powerful.
Like the sort of
yeah.
Yeah.
But
amazing.
now that you mentioned playing that for McCartney, he's kind of notorious for not acknowledging XTC.
It's a shame, isn't it? Yeah. I wonder why. Having said that, there's a couple of bands that I've played to Andy that I think, working the other way around, a couple of bands that have thought XTC were, the gods, the founding fathers. And I've played a couple of bits to Andy, and Andy's gone, yeah. And he couldn't quite get to that place where he's going, oh, I get it. Yeah, that's quite, yeah. I guess it's a funny thing if you're hearing stuff that you might feel has been taken from your own work. You might not. Do you know?
I do. It's interesting because I remember.
I guess it's how charitable you are in terms of who's doing what. You can look at something and you can say, oh, well, I get what they've done there. I kind of understand the genetics of that. I understand the atoms of that. But nevertheless, it's a good endeavor. And you can be appreciative on that level, even if you kind of know what they've done. I mean, there's been a lot, but I've heard lots of tapes and things, people have sent me stuff where it's essentially been like bands that have post-Tears, trying to do a Tears thing. And more often than not, I'll think, yeah, that's a good endeavor. Yeah, they've got a love of what they're doing, and that's great. But it's not like hearing something I don't understand. It's amazing,
Right.
So maybe McCartney's hearing No Language and going, yeah, I see how this works.
Or Towers of London.
Indeed. There's endless. There's endless.
What did you think when you heard King for a Day?
I'm trying to think. I think Great Express, that album, there's a track on there. Well, that's This World Over. That's This World Over. I remember hearing that and thinking, I was on the train driving through a part of the countryside, which is near where Andy lives. And for some reason, they had some fields that were on fire. It was like they were burning some stuff. And I was listening to that track, and it was so emotional because I'd just come back from London, and the songs about, a post-Holocaust kind of thing. And I remember being profoundly affected by that. I think that was one of the last tracks where Andy's writing knocked me emotionally flying. And then the rest is just, I generally adore and think is brilliant. But I remember that one really. And I've spoken to him about that. And I said the backbeat's too loud, Andy, in the mix. But I'm just thinking about bits of skylarking that are profound for me as well. Yeah.
And there's some cool programming on that too.
Indeed. Yeah.
I'm impressed that you were able to get Macca to actually sit down and listen to some of that stuff, because you may be the only one.
Is that right? I mean, it was a short-lived period. I did spend not a very long period, but I spent some time working with him. But that was before I was working with him, because he was recording, I think it was Tug of War. Forgive me for some of my memory and dates and exact chronology goes a bit haywire. But I was working at Air Studios when it was at Oxford Circus, not where it is now. And he was working, and he quite often would put his head around the door and just go, morning, and that'd be it, you know. And I was working a bass part out on something, and I can't remember who the band was, but I was sitting there playing bass, and he wandered in, and he looked at me and he said, oh, shall I go? Am I putting you off? You know, which is this kind of awareness of his own awareness. And I said, oh, do you play yourself? You know, which is like beyond facetious. But he sort of, he kind of enjoyed the wryness. And we got chatting and talking, and, you know, and at one point, and Linda was around at the time, so she'd pop in and just chat and hang out. Never for very long, but nevertheless. And at one point I said, oh, I've got to play this, XTC, got to play this. So at some point I played him No Language. And, he was, yeah, great, you know. But he didn't go, wow, I'm going to change my whole view on music. But, you know, yeah, I'm glad I played it to him. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about working with him, because you did some interesting stuff there.
I didn't do much, but I had an amazing time, extraordinary, because of spending a little bit of time with him at Air. He was desperate to finish something off. It was actually Flowers in the Dirt was the album he'd been working on. I don't know about the schedule, but he hadn't got much time left. He was doing something where there was a deadline. And by a set of phone calls, I was asked if I'd like to finish off a track he'd started, or he had a kind of rough working of a track called Motor of Love. And I heard it. I said, yeah, sure, I'd love to. So I'd met him before at this, as I say, at Air Studios. And I got given the 2-inch masters. And I remember thinking, there's a section in this song that's missing. There's a kind of middle eight or some kind of exposition or some kind of journey away from what was going on. And I literally cut the tape and put 12, I think it was 12 bars, or it wasn't 16. It was more than 8, obviously. I put 12 bars of like drum box at the tempo in the tape. And he turned up and I said, look, it was copy master. So I said, I put like 12 bars where something new could happen, completely new. And it's just got drum box reference. And he said, oh, yeah, okay, let's just plug a keyboard in. And this is no exaggeration. We ran the tape, and at the point where the new section would start, and everything dropped to drum box, he just started playing and was humming a bit and did a thing, and then it wandered off and came back, and then he stopped, and the track continued. And he just said, well, yeah, that's kind of what I do. And it was amazing to watch him just completely make something up first take. He just did a little meandery, wandery thing, and that was it. And it was done. I mean, the progression was made, and then we took the whole thing apart and rebuilt it for real. But so to see him working at close quarters was extraordinary. And then I don't know if I lost volume with you.
No. I whispered, wow.
Oh, okay. I thought I should have been hearing wow. I could see wow.
It's even bigger when it's quiet.
Yeah, it's a big wow, actually. I'll remember that. Yeah, that's an old director's trick, isn't it? Talking to an actor, when you say you're an important man in this scene, you don't need to shout. People will listen. So giving a wow without any was good. I remember that, Greg. Thanks for that. That's good. Where was I? Yes. So we went off and built Motor of Love, and then he said we talked about Figure of Eight, and he'd recorded that, and I said I thought it could be better. I mean, there's a way of saying to anybody, this could be better. I mean, I wasn't trying to be arrogant or unkind, but I thought the song was better than the way it'd been done. So we set about doing that and, finishing that, and Bob Clear Mountain mixed it, and that was it. So I think the whole period of actually working with him was about 3 months from beginning to end, on and off. And, I cherish it. It was great. I had some fantastic conversations with him.
I'd love to hear about that a little bit.
Well, there's things where you don't want to be saying, what was it like being in the Beatles?
Right.
What an absurd question, But I remember asking him about the nature of, songwriting and songs and how they work. And he just said, well, he goes, the minute, if I'm doing something, the minute I sort of try and analyze what I'm doing, it's gone. And he was very quick to point out that he didn't really want to do any kind of analysis of where we were at, what we were doing. It was just like, it's a little place where you get to, and you can be excellent in it, not too deliberate and overthinking it, because it just evaporates. So he was great. He was great at trying to sort of express the nature of where he didn't want to be. He just wanted to be in a place where the music would do a thing. And he's, obviously we all know he's an unbelievable natural at that, so he can pull things together. And you just think, well, who would have thought about putting a trumpet there, or whatever it is, unbelievably talented and practiced at it. He's practiced at what he does. So, we were doing a vocal at one point, and I was saying that, no, let's go again. And I think a slightly frustrated moment, he said, well, what was wrong with that? And they said, no, don't even answer. I know what's wrong with it. I know what's wrong with it. Let's go again. So, his sense of, you can consider how much recording he's done. The actual hours in the studio, it's phenomenal, the body of work he's recorded. So he clearly knows what he's doing, So I felt privileged to be in amongst that process. Yeah.
I bet. And watching the process, I don't know if you've seen the Sound City film, but he's making a song in the studio with Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
You've seen that?
Yeah.
It's remarkable.
Oh, of course it is. Yeah. Yeah. There's also a recording he did with Steve Miller, because obviously they did some stuff back at Olympic when I think Macca was a bit sort of low, and he wandered into a Steve Miller session. They became mates, and he plays bass on a couple of things. And then years and years later, they got together and did some playing. And I always liked his work with Steve Miller, because I always felt he had a lot of respect for Steve Miller. So it was like something he'd be quite relaxed and naturally enjoying, not being a sort of necessarily the dominant notion in the room. I think he's got a lot of time for Steve Miller, as indeed I have. He's that good.
Did you ever speak with him about Stockhausen?
No.
I mentioned that because I love the fact that they included him on the cover of Sgt. Pepper.
Indeed. Yeah.
And that they were aware of the tape stuff and
Yes.
Gesänge die Junglinge, and
Yeah.
They knew the most out shit.
Yes.
And they were willing to bring that to pop.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I mean, honestly, Greg, don't get me started when we start talking about the Beatles. They wrote the book. They did it all. They did kids' tunes, you name it. They played on the roof. The one thing they never did was reform, which they couldn't have done. That's it. That's the only thing they never managed to do.
Well, it was a window. I think the window was going to close.
Yeah. And I suppose you think of them as young men and growing up and the whole process. It's quite a nice life period they had. I can't imagine if the Beatles were going now, what that would be like. It would be, I couldn't imagine it. So, unbelievably important group.
sometimes I think I have to ask you this as a person who's been so integrated into the continuation of that Beatles explosion that went into all corners of British pop and just the world.
Yeah.
That it's almost that the other bands, and we mentioned XTC, but I'll also put Queen in there.
Yes.
The bands that sort of don't get put on the same level, when I think that they maybe even took it a little bit further in some ways. Is that sacrilegious to say?
No, it's not. And in fact, if you define your terms before you start the conversation, there's a whole bunch of things I believe. I mean, for me, strangely, XTC and the Beatles share one thing for me, and that is they're both underrated. And people go, how can you say the Beatles are underrated? But they are, because everyone goes, oh, yeah, the Beatles. Yeah, they're great. But they're actually way better than that. They're better than most people think they are. And I'm not saying that from an arrogant place where I like the Beatles, but I'm just saying they're that good. They're so much better than I think the general. And they're a sensation, and people, of course, the Beatles are revered and they are brilliant, but they're still underrated. They're still better, I think, than most people understand. And XTC, without a doubt, are unbelievably underrated.
And I'll follow up on that by saying, in the way that most people don't go to the depth of what's in that music. So yes, they're rated really high.
Yeah, of course.
But if you were to go in, get your headphones on and really go in there and sort of understand even what they're up against at that moment to make those things happen.
Yeah.
Because I teach a course on studio production, and we talk about the relationship with George Martin.
Yeah.
And how important he is as a facilitator.
Yeah.
And in many ways, what you're saying in your job as a producer is a continuation of what he was doing for the Beatles.
Well, yeah, most certainly the realm of what production became. Yeah, there's always that moment where you think you might be doing a George Martin on something or being influential on some level. And of course, actually, that set of relationships is completely unique. And, when you consider George Martin working with that band America or any of the other things he worked with, including he worked with Mahavishnu. His work's brilliant in lots of different ways. And he's not beatling it up on the Mahavishnu record, or Jeff Beck, he worked Jeff Beck. So there's so many, so any producer can be kind of one thing or a bunch of things, depending on what they've had a chance to do. George Martin was doing comedy music before. He was doing the Goons and all sorts of Peter Ustinov and all manner of extraordinary Peter Sellers records and all sorts of things,
Which is what makes him attractive to the Beatles at that point.
John Lennon's humor. Yeah. And it must have been great for the Beatles to be able to in a casual way have George Martin as a father figure on some level. You can just imagine going, come on now, lads, let's get on with this one. And you can imagine that whole kind of very gentle, it goes kind of like this, let's do this, and this is only a 3-hour session, lads. It's quite formal, I guess, back then.
Yeah. Until it became informal.
Until they kind of owned the place.
Yeah.
Have as much studio time as they wanted.
And how much of being a producer is being an arranger?
It varies. It depends. Some things come in fairly fully formed. And you go, okay, this is an endeavor. We have to get this to tape working and be more expressive than what we've got in the demo. And other times you go, well, this is clearly a lovely set of themes, but it's in an insanely bad order, and the elements don't stack up, and this needs to be clearer, and we need to put that here, and that needs to drop back to a re-intro, and that tag needs to be this part of that bridge, and you kind of you get a feel for what kind of ought to happen, and then you try it out. You know, I've driven some groups mad going, I still don't think we got the block arrangement, let alone the parts. You know, like I need this bridge to be a bit longer, and I don't know why, and it make the asymmetries come, and it sounds too much like the song's front loaded, and there's not enough going. You know, every version of a puzzle and a problem you can face, and you just wade through it. So yeah, arranging's very, very important. When it comes to things like a sophisticated brass or string arrangement, then there'll be people that do that ways better than I could do it. And I'll work with the right people and get the right sort of soundscape to work. But in terms of the nature of, you know, even from the nature of, this is the tempo. We've been playing this 3 BPM too slow. The demo was too slow anyway, because it was done in a bedroom where the guy's still working the chords through. You know, I need this up a good 8 or 10, you know, BPM. You know, and then all the discussions with that, oh no, that's way too fast, I can barely get the lyrics out. And yet you work on it for a couple of days and it becomes the norm and the lyrics all come beautifully. It's a, you know what it's like, it's an endless process of trying to get an idea into being a cohesive record. And you can fail a lot doing it. It's not always easy.
You're co-writer on Everybody Wants to Rule the World, yes?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about putting that beautiful piece of music together.
Okay, so the basic deal is this. It's summer in England and the windows are open and it's a lovely period of time. And the studio's got some balconies and it's just very open. And there's people sort of milling about and it's just a nice atmosphere. And periodically, and at the time we were working on Shout, okay? And prior to that, there'd been a discussion where I felt that Songs from the Big Chair was a couple of songs light. I didn't think we had enough songs. So there was a kind of, yeah, we need more songs, and Shout was one of those. So Roland was walking around the house and on the balcony and hanging around. He'd be just on acoustic guitar and he goes, gang, gang, every now and again. He just hit 2 chords and leave it at that. And I was fascinated by just the nature of what he was doing. And it was reminiscent of Waterfront by Simple Minds, which isn't the same rhythm. It's gang, gang in their case, but the idea of a couple of expressive chords. And he said, I said, what are they? And he said, it's this and it's that. And I programmed a little synth sequencer and a little drum box and just had, you know, press a button and I'd have the this kind of little jump.
Was it initially swung?
I initially swung it, yeah. Yeah. Whether it was originally swung in the case of Roland on an acoustic guitar going jang, jang, I don't recall whether he was putting the shuff in what he was doing. I'm sure he felt it was, but I definitely programmed a thing and had it shuffling along, and no one was that bothered, and Roland wasn't particularly bothered. And I was saying, guys, this little feel is great, you know. And it was around for a while, you know, when we'd all be sitting around a bit of downtime, I'd saunter over and press the button and have ding, 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 ding come out. And on one occasion, it was a beautiful sunny afternoon and people hanging out. And I remember putting it on quite loud and having the windows open. And Caroline, which was Roland's wife, came in. She said, wow, what's this? This is so nice. This is great. What's this? And I said, it's just a little jump. Tell Roland you like it. They're his chords. You know, tell your husband this. And anyway, over about the next 2 or 3 weeks, I kept banging on about it. And Roland came in after a weekend and said, I got kind of something. And he had a kind of some rough idea. And I remember saying, just guys, let's just stop what we're doing and just write this and make this do a thing. And so myself and Ian Stanley and Roland just sat down and built the song from those two chords. And we did it, and the whole thing was made up or written and recorded in a week. I think it was 5 days. And there were things that went, parts of it were incredibly quick to do. I remember I went into the room to play drums. We ran the track down, and I played drums twice, from top to bottom twice. And then I listened to what I'd done and the bits I liked, and then programmed exactly what I played of the bits I liked. So all the fills and all the sort of where cymbals land and all the sort of da-da, da-da, and all the kind of hesitant rolls and all the bits all just came off the top straight off. And I just literally two run throughs and just programmed all the expressive bits. So it's clearly not a human playing it. It's all machinery, but it's just the shuffle's tampered with, and it all does a thing. Yeah. So that's how that came about. Yeah, and it was such a refreshing difference. I mean, Shout, I have to tell you, we had Shout on the board seemingly for months trying to get that right, adding bits and making it longer, and I remember having a discussion about at this point we need a guitar solo. Guitars. Let's have guitars. Let's do let's have some kind of rock and roll buffoonery, up on the mountain, rock guitar. And I remember the guys thinking, no, you're kidding me. We're not, this is some kind of synth anthem. This is some kind of chantscape, not rock guitar. Anyway, needless to say, we got rock guitar on it in the end, So that was like pulling teeth. That took a long time. We knew we liked it, but it was difficult to get right. And it lumbers along. It lumbers along in a completely different density, in a different way. Everybody's like a breeze in comparison,
Right.
Shout was quite hard to get.
I always think it's kind of dark too.
It is dark. It is dark. It's the subject matter's dark. It was both Roland and Kurt were, they were working through stuff, So there's dark stuff in the writing. Yes, that's definitely right. And the text, what he's saying, Shout, he's saying, let it out. It is that kind of, it is that Janov primal scream kind of thing, where just stand there and bellow it out, So and he believed that then and still does. So it's quite true. It feels real. It's not like some kind of fashionable statement he's making. It comes from his heart, that lyric.
So what are the Tears for Fears tracks that are the deep cuts we should really be checking out?
If I was hanging with you now in a kind of let's get the records out sense, I'd put stuff on and go, oh man, listen to this. I forgot about this. This is really important, or this is quite interesting, or that mistake led to that. I mean, I'd probably bore you senseless with that sort of stuff. A track I like that's it's not a mystery track. I mean, it's Sowing the Seeds, that track. I mean, I'm playing drums on that, so I've got an inside sense of what's going on in that track. But there was bits of that track which I remember a beautiful section which got cut out, and it's Roland reminiscing about a kind of 60s London, and it was a beautiful section about half a crown, which half a crown was a coin, British coin, half a crown, half a Guinness going down. It was beautiful poetry, but it got lost along the way. And that song, in terms of arrangement, I mean, that went through a lot of changes and was quite complex, and there was a lot of work on that, but I think it's a great piece. Woman in Chains is another one that's slightly more complex than it might appear. I think that's quite an important piece of work. Guitar part is Fairlight programmed, the arpeggio, but it was a Neil Taylor, Neil who played the outro solo on Everybody, I believe, had that arpeggio under his hand, and that was used and transferred to Fairlight.
Did he come up with the guitar riff on Everybody?
No. Neil just did the outro solo, the kind of slightly angular playing. But Roland, all the didn't that is Roland straight off. And then there's other kind of guitar rhythms in there, like there's a Ovation guitar part which is going ding 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 ding. So there's lots of little bits, and they're all Roland. He got the whole rhythm thing on top of the bass and the drum machines. Yeah.
So what happened on Seeds of Love? You kind of took off.
Yes, I did. I worked for about 10 or 11 months on that, and we just drifted apart. We just didn't really, I didn't think there was an inertia set in. I didn't think we were getting anywhere. And I don't know, it's a hard one. I mean, Roland's version of that may be very different. I mean, it's just one of those things where I think maybe I ran out of steam and found it frustrating. It felt like it was taking too long. Didn't think it was getting anywhere. I mean, it was getting somewhere, but it didn't feel like it to me. And ideas were sort of being presented, and then, a couple of days later, they'd be gone again. And there was a kind of, and I also think that it was a point where probably Roland just kind of wanted to do it all himself. I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that if you look at Roland's contour, if you look at the first album, the number of songs he consciously wrote for Kurt to sing as the pop front guy, and then each album is less and less Kurt. And I just think he came into his own in terms of composition, how he wanted to express things, and it became something he wanted to be kind of at the helm. And although he wanted help periodically, it became, he kind of had a sense of how he wanted this to work. And so I went to New York. I went off and did something else, and I came back and the guys were still sort of working on it, and I hung in there, and but nevertheless, it was a point where we split.
A lot of classic stuff, though.
Yeah, I mean, there was no acrimony. It wasn't like a bad thing. It wasn't that. There was no sort of like, okay, well, I'm off then. You're all loathsome. It was nothing like that. I got. There was a call, and we said, Rogue kind of wants to continue on, and that was kind of like, fine, yeah, okay, that's good. I'll do something else.
I guess you heard that over the weekend Jon Hassell passed.
I know. That's unbelievably sad. Unbelievably important. Yeah. Yeah, pioneer. And amazing how I used to joke about how some of his stuff sounded like it was being played on a broken trumpet. I don't mean that in any way nasty. This level of breath and sort of resonance of the brass, as opposed to the amount of pump through the trumpet, is just adorable. So reflective, so important, incredibly important. Yeah. But I mean, I don't know much about his life, but he was quite old. I guess we say that's quite a good innings, as we say, isn't it? It's not like, being at the peak and dying at, say, 50 or something.
But what was his connection with Tears?
I liked some Jon Hassell staff, and I think I may have played Roland the Eno Hassell thing. And I think, I had a relationship, and still have, but a period of time with those guys where we would sit and play stuff. So, playing Robert Wyatt, there's some soft machine stuff you need to hear. And Jon Hassell, amongst a load of stuff, was something I thought they should like or enjoy or be aware of. And so I think there was just a moment where Roland thought, yeah, that tonality, that resonance, that density would be great. And so that's essentially what happened. He came down and recorded. I have to say, I wasn't there when Jon recorded that, but amazing stuff.
So much to talk about. You also did Lynn programming on Peter Gabriel's Red Rain.
I did. So Peter called, and so where I live, and where at that time where the Tears lived, and where Peter lived, and the Real World Studios, and that whole thing. Actually, Real World wasn't open at the time when that was done. It was his farm studio in farmland, and so everyone kind of knew everyone to some degree, and got a call saying, would you be interested in coming down and having listened to this track? And my understanding was, when I got there, was that it had lost focus on the arrangement and the spinal column of the track. I may be wrong here, but that was the impression I was given, that they couldn't quite get it finished, or it was hovering around and not quite right. And so I listened to the track, and there'd been loads of people that had come down and played. I know Stuart Copeland had done some drumming, and there was lots of people. So there was multi-tracks and lots of stuff to try and fathom out and make some kind of sense. And I remember saying, well, let's hear it from the top, and trying to work out that 18 bars was doing that. And, because there's in a lot of Peter stuff, there's some fantastic asymmetries. It's not all 8 bars. Why would it be? So I remember trying to fathom out what was going on, or what was kind of suggesting going on, and saying, well, why don't we have essentially this kind of rhythm underpinning this bit, so that the work can make sense on that level, and then sit and listen to the next bit and think, well, the beat could be this, because that's what I think the bass or something else is implying. So let's anchor that down for the next. And I went through the track, trying to make sense of what the drum parts might be throughout the whole sections, and left it at that. And I thought, and Peter played me Sledgehammer, and it's a very early form, and said, do you like shuffles? Any thoughts about this? I thought it was great, and I don't think hadn't got any singing on it at that point. It was just a fantastic backing track. And so that was it. I came and did the programming and never thought anything more about it. I just thought, well, I've kind of made that kind of make sense. At least to me, it made sense. And anyway, it got finished with that spinal cord of the Lynn programming being the kind of underpinning of the rhythmic sections. So that was my work on that, and very enjoyable.
And you also did a lot of work with Robert Plant on Fate of Nations.
I produced that album with him, yeah, and played on a handful of tracks. That was good. I mean, Robert was an amazing guy to work with. Because I think, as most people who know of Robert, he can be, and I've said this before, he can walk in, like some 6'6" Viking, and be quite sort of like formidable, and you don't really want to take on any kind of shape with the guy. And other times you wander in like your best mate and be like completely, hilarious and a real kind of like creative artist without all the big thing, you know. So you get lots of versions of him. But yeah, he's an amazing guy, and an amazing artist. You know, he is not just a rock singer, you know, he's way more than that, you know. Unbelievable conversations I had with him about, you know, all manner of sort of sub-Saharan music, and you name it, just loads of things he's interested in. And his knowledge of American blues music and folk music, it's incredible. So you can, you know, you can spend an afternoon where you should be getting work done just chatting to him about vocal styles and all sorts of stuff. Oh, he's endlessly interesting. I had one moment with him, which was we were arguing about a guitar part doing a certain thing, and you know, and it was this thing where he was sort of, I'd noticed that when he was presenting some argument, you know, he could often say, well, you know, in Zepp we might have done such and such, and you know, if I'd said, well, you could have some guitars, you know, like in Zepp, and he was never really thrilled with someone suggesting it would be like Zepp. That's how they would have done it. He wanted to hold the, and rightly so, he'd want to hold the notion of, and I remember saying, how is it when we're discussing this sort of stuff, you can mention Zepp, but I can't. I said, let me tell you something about Zepp you have no idea about. I said, I was in the 5th row, centre, Albert Hall, 1969, when you guys were raging on stage, and you have no idea what that feels like as a kid, witnessing that. And he went, oh, fuck. And he kind of lost the argument based on the fact that I told him about an experience he'd never had, which was watching his group. So he, you know, and he gave me a hug and he was laughing. So that's about the only kind of moment where I was trying to get a point across. But no, an amazing guy. Amazing guy.
Well, I always found it interesting that Gabriel and Plant were very astute in terms of world music styles and
yes.
areas, and were searchers.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I had a conversation with Peter about an idea he had for an album, which was, and it's an amazing idea, where he was basically, he'd have some recordings and he'd send them off kind of around the world, and people around the world would add bits to it, and it would come back, and then he'd have this kind of fantastic jamboree bag full of the makings of an album. And I remember saying to him, it's just too simple for you to just go into the studio and make a record quickly, isn't it? And he said, yeah, I can't do that.
Those stories, those are epic stories of how long things take. And
yeah. And at what point you chip in and start saying, should you be doing it this way? And you think, well, it's a fantastic afternoon discussing the options, because those guys kind of do what they do, and they do it well, and they'll take advice when they want advice, you know. And it's a good rule to understand that. And it's another good rule, and I'm telling you stuff I know you know, but there's, with artists at any given point, depending on what they're wrestling with, they either want your opinion or they want your approval. And they're vastly different. And sometimes the way to get something great is to basically say, yeah, this is really good. Keep going. It's great. It's great. Honestly, that brass is perfect. Don't worry about it. It's great. Keep going. You know, there's maybe some other rhythmic element, but it's essentially great. I approve. And there's other times where it's much more about opinion, where you can be much more critical, because they're going, what's wrong with this? Why can't I get this right? And if they're appealing for that amount of help, that's a great point where you can give it, if you can. But sometimes problem solving and giving opinion isn't what's required. It's just like, yeah, keep going. This is great.
Yeah, I think as a producer, you have to know when to shut up.
Sure.
And you have to know when to not overproduce.
Yes. And another thing is, there's a point where there's a place where you have to recognize that something isn't going well, possibly before everyone else. and go, guys, I've got to stop you here. And the key thing is you say, and here's why. I just think we've gone over the edge of this. And it sounds like it's trying too hard to land something. And I think perhaps we should try this tomorrow lunchtime when it's percolated and everyone's had a chance to dream it through. And everyone will play this so much better tomorrow. Let's do that. And more often it goes, yeah. But let's just try one more. Let's just try one more. And you go, okay. And you can nail it. Sometimes you get it on that one more. You know, not always, but. So you have to be aware of that set of contours. You have to be able to look at something and go, no, this isn't quite right. And you can also have to look at a situation where one person in that outfit is actually, even if they don't know it, is being disruptive and is not the player or not the element that should be there. And I think people are sometimes quite uncomfortable with, no one wants to really say, I think the bass player should go. It's a tricky one. You know. So there's that whole, you know, the psychology of it. You know, you've got 30% music, 70% psychology. When you're dealing with people trying to do good work, not a psychology.
Yeah, I learned a lot from how Todd produced, because I knew that he could be gruff and sort of pushy and want his way. Yeah. But I also knew, and this will interest you. Have you ever heard of an American band called 12 Rods?
No. I'm writing it down though.
I must send you some stuff. He produced their album in 2000 called Separation Anxieties at a place they had in Hawaii. And it's not a record that did anything. It was on Virgin. They brought him in to produce this album. So it wasn't like they were huge Todd fans. So when I brought this up, we were hanging out on the bus or something, on a tour or a run or something. And I mentioned this album to him, and it knocked me out, because the last thing I expected to hear him say was, yeah, I didn't really have to do that much. They came in very prepared, and I knew that I just was hands off.
Well,
Todd.
Yeah.
And
but, Todd, I would happily talk to you all day about Todd and pick your brain on that. But I was never really sure at what point he was aware of how overbearing he was being. And I don't mean that in a negative. I know. The nature of him steering it, and anybody listening to it would go, well, that's Todd. You can hear the amount of input he's got. Whether he was fully aware of how overbearing, if you like, he was being, and that for him was still part of the process and valid and justifiable. Did he just feel that people perhaps couldn't keep up and therefore he would overcompensate, or would he just want to dominate anyway?
My take is that he knew and knows when it's right.
Yeah.
And he has, he feels his job. And of course, the big kerfuffle with Skylarking was that his job was to come in and steer this thing.
Yeah.
Against the wishes of the person who wanted to steer his own music. And that's understandable.
Yes.
But I do know that Todd is a visionary.
Yes.
And when he hears a demo, he gets a jillion ideas.
Yeah.
So, it's sort of like, I once had a conversation with, I think, Dave Liebman, where I said something about Jack DeJohnette. And he said, well, you don't have Jack DeJohnette come in and tell him what to do. You have him come in and be Jack DeJohnette.
Yeah.
So, with guys that are that strong,
yeah,
that have that much vision, you're either going to let him do his job or not. Yeah. And then, of course, when he meets resistance,
yeah,
he's going to say, well, I know the right way to do this.
Yes.
You can disagree with me. I mean, there's quotes from that session,
Of course.
You can.
But the point I'm curious about is, because he's that good and he's that perceptive and that intelligent, that is there a place where someone's saying to him, 65% of what you're doing is so amazing to this project. If you back off the other 35, it'll be even better than you could believe. And for him to go, oh, there's a fucking strong argument. And I wonder whether he can do that. I don't know whether that's necessarily a failing, but it's an interesting idea where you get people that cannot get to the place where something could be better if you did less and did some of it excellently.
Well, that's why I bring up the 12 rods, because
right.
he knew they came in with some hip shit.
Great.
And was able to be hands off enough. And then, of course, the great irony is I had the guy who put 12 rods together and wrote all and sang all the stuff, Ryan Olcott, on the program. And he said, I don't think Todd did enough. He could have done more.
Wow.
So, you know, you get into that kind of thing where Todd's saying, no, you guys got it. And he's saying, well, what else do you have, Todd? So you know, it's always interpersonal stuff, and it's always a kind of dynamic between personality types. And
yeah. And also there's that thing where if you're a bit of a songwriter and that's your main thing and you're writing a good song, sometimes the demo you make, if you make it so that it's not an amazing demo, people hear it and love the song, they can instantly want to cover it because they can imagine making it amazing. Whereas if you come in with a great song done brilliantly, people might find that harder to cover. So in the case of Todd hearing a band that fully formed, he might think, oh, well, you know, this is kind of works anyway. Had they been crumbly and not very good, he might have had a million ideas and gone, I can get this band that are okay into something exceptional. But if they're already good, that might not wet the juices in the same way.
Right. And you've heard the Skylarking demos.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's ground to be made there, you know, there's,
of course.
I guess.
Don't get me wrong. There's exceptional work on both parts.
Yeah.
You know, you can hear the thinking in the demos and you can hear his end result. And it's an amazing, amazing record.
Truly.
Yeah, truly.
But you see Todd sort of, I feel he's pretty chameleonic in that way, in that I like the fact that the different bands that he's produced, apart from that Tubes album, which I think sounds like a Utopia album.
It does. But perhaps the Tubes were brilliantly up for it so that they would go. Yeah. I mean, they're exceptional guys, you know, but you listen to those records and it's just like unbelievable. It's unbelievably Todd-like. You know, but another Todd album I really like is the Sparks album he produced. You know, there's some crazy things on that record.
Yeah.
Todd, amazing. Yeah.
But you know, we learn. Certainly, I've learned from asking producers questions. You know, like I'm doing with you right now. I mean, I want to know everyone's process.
Yeah.
Because I want to know not just how they did it, but why they did it.
Yeah.
What generated that way of thinking, that path, that rabbit hole that you went down, you know? Yeah. And also the objectivity of not having written the material.
Yeah, well, I think that's a big part of it, because when you're producing, part of the head you can have on is that I'll just take ownership of this song. This is my song just for a few minutes. You know, this might be before a session starts, you know, and you can get into a whole fantasy about how I wrote that bit, which you clearly haven't done, but I know that it should have had flutes and stuff. And you go, oh, flutes, okay. And almost like a conversation you're having where it's all yours and what you do. And you put triangles on that bit, and you'd have a different harmonic nature to that bridge, and you do all these sort of things in your head, and then you bring those ideas, having let go of the fact that it's your song, because it clearly isn't, and sometimes people will go, yeah, great, let's pursue that, yeah, amazing, And other times I go, no, that couldn't be, that's taking the song in the wrong direction. What are you thinking? You know? So it's a lot of conversation, you know, and sometimes it's the producer's fault, you know.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
Kris, I wanted to ask you about Shift 94 and
Yes.
your interfacing with the music of Steve Reich in your later work.
Yeah.
You know, it's on some level to me it seems transformative. On another level it seems reverential, or you know, kind of referential.
Yes.
And so I guess I wonder, like, what generated those pieces for you in your musical mind?
I kind of just wanted to, well, the starting point was I wanted to just do something on my own for me and not be producing. So I wanted to do something, just do something. And I got most of the scores from a whole bunch of his pieces. And I started looking through them and thinking about how come that section sort of shifts, because we know that these musicians are playing faster than these musicians, and eventually it'll catch up and it'll be, you know, an eighth note in phase when it arrives. And, you know, I like the maths and the look of that. And so I started programming, this computer programming, some Fairlight actually, the maths. And I made little calculators which would look at the number of beats per, number of clicks per beat, and how you'd foreshorten that so this would catch up and where it would be at a certain point. And I spent ages, almost therapeutically, going through a kind of maths analysis and how I could make this work. So I did that, and I had a bunch of pieces. And I got the chance to go to Steve Reich's apartment in New York with a whole bunch of these pieces. I'd sort of early days computer and sample constructed various pieces, and you know, I chatted to him and I played, you know, some pieces. And when I'd finished, he said, right, okay. And it was kind of like, where do we go from here, sort of thing. I said, well, you know, having gone through the nature of the way these become jazzier in places because of the phase relations, and they've got a funk to them, and you know, it's far from this clinical maths thing. It goes into a place which is just full of so much else, so much other stuff. I said, from that, I've done a series of variations based on your stuff, and I'd love to play you a couple of those. And one of the things I played him, even though I didn't know it at the time, had a kind of Techelim feel to it. I mean, it wasn't deliberate, and I didn't even know that was in the pipe, but it was just something. And his whole approach changed. He went, great, fantastic, come. And he took me into his back room, and he had loads of instruments, and he was pulling things out. So, have you heard this? Yeah, you should hear this. And he pulled out a artist proof fanfold, beautiful. I've got it. It's a treasure of the whole handwritten of drumming, the whole score. He said, here, maybe work on that. And so, as I say, these were demos and rough attempts that I played in. And he said, yeah, have this. Great. So I came back to England and then started work taking the score apart and doing what I did with it. And that's kind of how that went. And it was a thrill to do. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, I listen back to it now and I think it's extraordinarily clinical, but nevertheless, at the time, you know, I was dealing with lots of counting and lots of numbers and lots of maths. So yeah, that's how that came about.
Do you have other projects in that vein?
I did another record more recently, about 3 or 4 years ago, which is it's my work, it's my compositions, but it's not based on phase relationships particularly. It's other things I was exploring, the idea of repetition, but the pulse isn't at a set tempo, so things have got a kind of rubato in it or whatever it is. That I found fascinating. I enjoyed making that record. It's called Ironic Life. It came out a while ago, but it's not based on Steve Reich per se, and it's not about long drawn out phase relationships, although there is bits in it that are pursuing phase calculation and phase relationship, which I obviously adore. I'm working on my new record. I'm working on, hopefully will be like a double. We always talk about double album, whether that's CDs or just a big stream online or vinyl, I don't know, but it's essentially 2 pieces which I'm calling continua. They don't repeat and they don't evolve. They just kind of exist, and you drop into what they're doing, and you can listen to that for as much as you like. You can listen to it for about 5 minutes and get enough. That'll do. Or you can sit back and listen to 20 minutes, or you can go deep listen and hear 45 minutes or an hour of it. And the pieces I've constructed, they're about an hour long, but they clearly could be endless because they're computer generated. So they work on their own sets of algorithms, which I've written. And I'm wading through that now, and hopefully that'll be released sometime in the next year.
Well, tell me what you mean by computer generated.
Well, it's in this case, the pieces I've been working on have been done using modular synths. So using aspects of random calculation or long sequences which keep repeating, or sequences which keep getting modified by other mathematical notions. So what I'm doing isn't particularly unique. There's a lot of guys doing some amazing generative work with modular synth. So I'm not claiming it's the process is particularly unique, but I'm enjoying the bit that I'm producing, the bit that I'm making, because I like it and I think it sounds new and interesting. So I'm excited about that, but I don't want to give too much away. It's because it's if you over talk it and not do it, you're doing the talking and not the walking. But I'm excited with that.
It vaguely reminds me of Xenakis's stochastic music,
Sure.
where he's setting up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can apply that. You could say, okay, let's have a piece of music where, in a Luke Reinhardt sense, you throw some dice and that'll be the key you're in, and then you throw dice again and that'll be the tempo. I mean, you can find things by strange means,
Yeah.
They're not actually that unorthodox these days. I mean, The idea has been around for quite some time, and there's a political aspect to that as well.
Tell me about that.
Well, if you look at, say, Malevich's paintings, turn of the century, square, that's clearly rejecting a load of stuff, but is incredibly important. So it's like rejecting the idea of romantic music writing. So it's political in that sense, where you're clearly doing something which is another side of the brain. It's kind of more what if and how does that work, and it's just different.
Were you interested in aleatoric music and Cage and those sorts of things?
Of course, yeah. But I've always liked the idea of wading through a lot of that stuff in a very naive way. Yeah. You hear a bit of Cage and you go, "What is he doing? What the hell's this?" And then you realise it's like he's written some idea down and it's become a piece, and you think, okay, why not? Great. But with people like that, I think you have to look at them. It's very much a body of work. If you judge Stockhausen or Cage or any of those guys, it's a body of work. It's amazing because it's so interrelated. It's like a network of work. That kind of sort of partially relates to that bit, and he was doing that, and then that's some whimsical idea over here, and that's fabulous, as opposed to sort of being in one trench, just kind of doing one thing.
It's a web of tangents.
Of course, yeah. I'll write that down, actually.
I'm going to put a C next to that. You can't have that one. And it may not be my next record, but
web of tangents. Well, listen, mate. I first of all, we're on record here, so I'm not going to claim that. I've just written it down. I'll enjoy looking at that.
Why the hell do you think I record these things?
Yeah.
You're not getting away with it.
No. Oh, and why would I? Yeah.
But it is interesting how when you open the door and you just say, I'm going to do everything that's of interest to me.
Yes.
And I'm going to use my time to just go on a flyer.
Yeah.
Is there anything feels any better than that?
No. It's absolutely brilliant. And the funny thing is, here's the weird thing. If you go, yeah, I'm doing that, and you have this lofty notion that the phone isn't going to ring, no one's going to be asking you for a deadline, nobody wants your help, you're just going to go off on one. And you go off on one, and then there's a point, it may be days or hours or whatever it is, where you go, I'm out here on my own. Is anyone going to phone? And there's this strange need to be distracted just so you can come back and then judge what you're doing. And it's a strange one because you can look back at it and go, well, I really enjoyed that journey, but what I've actually generated, all I've done is slightly educate myself, but the music I produced isn't great. And other times you can do something, you go, well, that was accidental almost. I don't know where that came from. Well, you found yourself doing something, you go, oh, wow. I'm proud of that. I really like that.
Mm.
And that's nothing to do with whether something you do is successful in the if you like, the commercial world. It's got nothing to do with that at all. Because there's things I've done that I've really loved that no one even got to hear. And there's stuff that I've done that's been successful that I thought was okay. I'm proud of it, but it wasn't my finest moment. So it's nothing to do with like the commercial world. It's the successes of doing something as an artist where you look at it and go, yeah, I've landed that correctly. That makes sense, Greg.
It makes sense to me.
That's good. At least the two of us get it.
Yeah. I love talking to artists like yourself because we're making maybe completely different sound worlds, but we have very similar interests in process.
Yes.
Right. I grew up studying serial 12-tone.
Oh man.
All the different methods.
Yeah.
And it's just a method, but of course it's what you do with it. And the same process between two people can yield completely different results. And I think that's what's of interest.
I know. And if you talk about, my father taught fine art at the Slade in London. And I remember him saying that, he'd be talking to like postgrad students and he'd be saying, well, we do a still life. And you've got a jug and a bowl and an orange. And that's it. And, you do your still life. And some of the students or artists, their work would be exceptional, transcendent. What they do with a bowl, an apple, an orange, and a jug, and others would be struggling with the nature of the contour of the jug or whatever, and somebody else would just have a vision and be off on one and be exceptional. And that nature of process and where that leads you, whether you're concerned about getting it, representing it exactly, or whatever your preoccupation with that is, the process may be different, but it's humans at work, isn't it? Ultimately, the
human mind.
Yeah.
I guess I haven't mentioned it much on the podcast, but my dad was a fine artist as well.
How great.
So, I grew up.
Did you like his work?
Yeah. It was fun. I don't think he was trying to change the world. sculpting, painting,
Yeah.
teaching.
Yeah.
Was very important to him.
Yeah.
Teaching is very important to me. I mean, there's a lot of things that I was exposed to.
Yeah.
Because to me, the visual world, maybe more than anything else, has inspired my music.
Yeah. Actually, why wouldn't it? It's that, it's that connected.
But I mean, he turned me on to Fellini.
Oh.
Lena Wertmüller and European filmmakers and abstract film and just the whole, Dali and
Great.
all of this stuff, which when I got tired of being inspired by music, I could always look at something and say, I know what that visual sounds like, and this is something that Andy and I share and something that I think that you're involved with.
Yeah. Oh, I said the connections are immense. There's no doubt. Anton Webern, I don't know if we mentioned him, but he's for me, extraordinary.
Tell me why.
It's just the kind of, I listen to it and go, this sounds unbelievably beautiful. I just hear it as beauty. And I know it doesn't appear that way to a lot of people, but there's so much beauty in his writing. And I think, how do you do that? I'm left thinking, this is amazing. It's so emotional, but how's he done that? So that it's that great. It's like you have a theory or a system and you test it with whether the results are any good or not. And the output of his stuff is just great. You think, oh, you know what you're doing. This is so great. I can't really express it past that point. It's just, it's just, for me, that type of music, I listen to his work and it feels like I'm in safe hands. Like he's not a clot. The guy is so on what he's doing,
Oh, yeah.
So it's just it's very confident for me. I just love it. It feels safe. I also think there's a part of this is that I heard it around the house growing up. My father would be playing, Schoenberg and Webern and those guys. And I guess I just heard it a lot and it just seems comfortable and it's beautiful to me. I love it.
It's crystalline.
Yeah.
It is pure.
Yeah.
It is in some ways a miniature that you can look at forever.
Yeah. Oh,
and, I've been hugely influenced by him. And I also have recently come to this new level of respect for him because think about this, Kris. He's doing that in a post-Wagner Germany, Austria-Germany situation.
Yes.
With the balls on that guy.
I know.
Because they must have thought, that's only a handful of notes. How is that a piece of music?
Yeah.
And he's got to stand there and take it.
Yeah. I mean, but I think, the history of that stuff and the history of modern composition, I mean, even Stravinsky, people are looking at his stuff and going, what are you doing? People were not thrilled. Audiences, they were agitated and,
But you mentioned, when you're talking about minimalist and you're talking about just the bare kernel of the thing.
Yes.
And Webern says, it's done once I go through these series of notes in this way.
Yes.
And there's not going to be development.
Yes.
In the 30s and 40s to be able to do that. And he's a post-Schoenberg guy.
How brave. Amazing.
And so that for me is almost like it's an Asian, almost like an Eastern point of view. And it connects to so many other trends in art that's reductionist.
Yeah.
And I just more and more and more enjoy it because I appreciate what it is to put two notes together.
Yeah.
That go to the next note, that go to the next note, Yeah.
And then if someone's doing, if there's a practitioner of that and they're doing it well, because that's if they're doing it well, and there's a sense of where the artistry comes in, you just think, this past the point of system, this person has an innate sense where the artistry comes in on the science, where they blend. You've got something. If the guy doing it has got it, it's like certain blues. I'm not going to mention names, but there's certain blues guitarists, for example, where they'll play one note and it'll break your heart. You get other blues guitarists that will play with a fantastic tone, and you just think you don't have it. It's not there. You're imitating it beautifully, but it doesn't feel like it's genuine. And I think in the case of Webern, he was genuine. He just had what he was doing. It was, he was the commander of what he was doing. I feel,
I agree. And also it's funny. I don't know why I always think in extremes, but one of my first big gigs was playing drums for the pianist Cecil Taylor.
Oh my word.
And you want to talk about extreme density.
Yeah.
So on one level, I've experienced that.
How was that for you? Was that exhilarating or terrifying or both?
Well, both, but I knew that he wanted me to do whatever I wanted to do. So I had studied with his drummers, Steve McCall and Andrew Cyril. I had gone to, every concert he played in New York. I would see him on the street and chat him up. Eventually hung out with him. And I knew he was a big fan of Stravinsky, Bartók, and contemporary classical music. So I said to myself, well, I'm not going to be a free jazz drummer in his group. I'll be a sort of percussionist jazz drummer who's studied contemporary classical drumming and percussion. So I could do prepared drum set. He would be fine with it. I could take out a vibraphone or a marimba. He'd be fine with it. I could bow cymbals. I could play with chains. Anything that I did, he was okay with. So it was an incredibly liberating and inspiring and encouraging, because I knew he was that.
Did he feel that at the point where you're going, chains, I could drop marbles on the floor, Tom, whatever the hell it is. Do you get the impression he just thought, well, here's a guy who's, this is a safe pair of hands. He will do this in a way that's gonna be good and make sense. Do you get the impression he must have felt that? Because there must be guys that want to go whacked out and do experimental and be whatever it is, who are so kind of wrong on some level.
But my strength is I have very good listening chops.
Right.
So I could always know when to stop.
Right.
I knew when to bring it down.
Right.
I knew when to listen to what he was doing, to interact.
Yeah.
Or do my own thing.
Yeah.
So, and I've probably never told this story, but I'm happy to tell it to you. We were on tour in South America, on a tour with Max Roach's quartet,
wow,
Horace Silver Quintet, John Zorn, Naked City, and trying to think who else, but Cecil Taylor unit. And Max Roach came to hear us.
huh?
And he said to me, you played your ass off, you had your own strategy, and you stuck to it.
How great.
So, and that was always what it was. And he said to me, I know what that's like, because he had played duets with Cecil and he had a strategy. And I think it's important, like we did, everything we're talking about here is strategy anyway, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So for me, it was, I'm going to have a strategy.
Yeah.
On this piece, I'm not going to play sticks. I'm
Right.
going to play brushes, and that's all I have.
Yeah.
On this piece, I'm going to bow things, and that's all I have. And that also came from my solo percussion music. So I had sort of this approach, which I thought would fit into his music.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been playing with this British guitarist, Derek Bailey,
Oh my word. Yes.
the father of improv music in Britain.
Yes. The father of that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I knew all the his percussionists, Jamie Muir, Tony Oxley,
Yeah.
Han Benink, all those guys were huge for me.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I know what those guys are doing. I know that I can do something else that's related to what they're doing. And then I knew that Cecil was going to play with Derek for the first time in '88.
Right.
And he said, I've never heard this guy, Derek. I said, oh, can I play you a tape of me playing with Derek so you get an idea of what he's doing? And he just got it. I mean, easily got, he goes, oh, okay. He said, you're changing textures and timbres very quickly. And that's, I've never heard anybody do it that well. And very, very into it. So that was sort of before I got the gig.
Yeah.
So when he hired me, I thought, oh, I'll do a version of what I do with Derek, but include Milford Graves and Philly Joe and all the other jazz drummers. And so I've kind of thought of myself as like bridging two different approaches.
Because you had that period of playing him a thing with Derek, he understood the width you were bringing. That's the key thing.
Yeah.
Or one of the key things.
Yeah. And the fact that I knew that he was cool with Bartok and Stravinsky.
Right.
And that we could talk about Elliott Carter. We could talk, I mean, you talk about the smartest people you've ever met. Yeah. Cecil was the most well-read person I've ever known.
Is that right? All
he did was read and he took me to see Kabuki. He took me to see the Bolshoi. We would go to the jazz clubs and after hours stuff. And so by the time I'm coming into the band, I didn't have any self-consciousness.
Yeah.
In fact, I followed Tony Oxley on the band.
Wow.
I got the gig because Tony couldn't come over. And then I got the record date because Sonny Murray didn't show up. So
have you written this, Greg, have you written all this down?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm going to do a separate Cecil book because I have scores, I have archival recordings, and our conversations were like the kinds of things, you're saying when you meet somebody that has all the same references and then you can learn from them and they'll let you take a flyer on anything. And only time he ever said anything to me was, don't play as loud as you're playing in this room because of this ceiling. Only time.
Wow.
Otherwise it was, you took care of everything. It was great. There's Chains on the opening track of Inflorescence. I mean, it's on A&M Records. No, the producer didn't say to me, don't do that.
Yeah.
It didn't blow out any mics.
Yeah.
It went to tape. It was tape.
Yeah.
And so that, in the context of what we're talking about, I thought about a little bit of Webern in Cecil Taylor's music.
Yeah. Why not?
Because he also said something that before I played with him, I knew because I read everything he said.
Yeah.
You have to be able to make one note sing. If you can make one note sing, you go from there.
Yeah.
And it was all about note placement for me from the beginning anyway, as a composer, as a percussionist who goes ding.
Yeah. Having counted 200 applause.
That thing from Meaning of Life, Python. Oh, I see you've got the machine that goes ding.
Yeah. Do you know the I don't know how apocryphal it is, but do you know the any of the Phil Siemens stories about him sort of falling asleep he was on an orchestral session, he fell asleep and apparently someone wakes him up just before he's supposed to hit a pair of cymbals, and he sort of kind of half wakes up in a stupor and just smashes them completely at the wrong moment, and is apparently heard to say, "Dinner is served," as he walks off.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
So in the context of Webern, Cecil Taylor, that's how my mind works, because when you can place one note with the right timbre.
Yep.
With the right color.
Yep.
And there's this moment on Inflorescence. I'll send you a link of the album, but he goes to extreme low cluster, like, you know, forearms.
Yeah.
And I had a tiny bell hanging off of my splash cymbal in the front of my kit. And he's down here and I go, bang. And there's no other moment like that in his music anywhere in the, you know, 70 years of his music.
Yeah.
So I think that this idea of us, you know, that you share with me of bringing these kind of different interests together is the job.
Yes. Yeah. And it's wide. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of music. And obviously there's a massive history of music, you know, and you can only kind of take in as much as you can take in. But my appetite for it hasn't waned, you know. There's going to be round the corner something I haven't heard where I go, oh my word, that's great.
I'm always learning. I'm always finding things.
Yeah.
I'm always inspired. I tell my students, you know, you keep doing input, you'll always have plenty of output.
Yeah.
And then it also don't have input, and then just let things stew for a while. And
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you a lot of Cecil stories. It's pretty.
Well, maybe there's a case of you being interviewed.
Okay.
It strikes me you've got masses and masses of really important stuff.
I also tried to do everything I was interested in.
Yeah.
So when it became about percussion, it was about percussion. When it became about writing it all down, it was about that. So I think every area you kind of obsessively go into it.
Yeah.
And then you move to another area and maybe there's some stuff from there that you take along.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's a lot of dumping stuff away.
Yes.
I think it's.
But there are things that are innately compelling because they're so rich. And there's other things you can grasp the nature of and think, oh, okay, that's okay, but you know, bye. It's not that vital, you know. And to keep the resonant, vital stuff around you is the key. Keep you going.
Yeah, and maybe never thinking too much about it. In it, you know.
I say one of the conversations I had with McCartney about songwriting is this whole notion of don't analyze it. It'll float away. He's very, very quick to, you know, I talked to him about certain aspects of things, and you know, he really said, no, if I think about that, it's all gone. It was that place where he's staying in that world, very important.
Well, also, Vinnie Colaiuta said to me something I think is very true, which is thought is the enemy of flow.
I'm just going to write that down.
It's a good one. And when you're in flow, it's coming from somewhere else.
So is.
I don't really know.
Yeah.
Necessarily. I mean, I guess it's sort of an abstraction of whatever your imagination and all of what you've taken in over your life. But yes, you get into that mode where you're not thinking.
Yes.
But you practice enough so that you don't have to think, so that you can have the technique to bring that stroke or bring that slide or whatever it is.
I'd ask you, when you've been playing live, has there ever been, and it's happened to me, has there ever been a moment where you're playing and you're not conscious of necessarily where you are in the arrangement of a piece of music, and you're doing a thing and you watch your arms doing all the right things you want them to do and all the right punctuations and everything, and it's fleeting, but there's this little moment when you come back and go, of course I'm here, and it's all making sense. But this little place where you're flowing and it it's almost transcends autonomic. It's just something that's, you wouldn't be able to say why you're generating what you're doing at that given moment, because you're right in that piece of music at that point. And that's an extraordinary place. And you sure as hell aren't thinking. So, I mean, I think Vinny, although I'll claim this as one of mine.
You bastard.
You boss. Vinny's spot on. He's absolutely right. Yeah.
And to hear him play, obviously that's what's happening. I mean, rhythm is flowing out of him.
Yeah.
And we all want to be at that point. I want to play the music.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, it's a simple mantra, play the music.
I'm writing that down too.
You have to play the music.
Yeah.
And you play the music that's at hand. And sometimes, I mean, another thing John McLaughlin once said to me is, I just try to get out of the way.
Oh my word, yeah.
I just try to stay out of the way. Right?
Yeah, it's great.
Because when it's happening, don't fuck it up.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's actually two things I pass on to my students. One is don't fuck it up. And the other is just try not to suck.
Try not to.
The highest compliment. Here's my highest compliment I ever give myself. Well, it didn't suck.
Yeah, try not to suck is extremely funny as well, though, isn't it? I mean, that's almost going into cartoon land. Try not to suck. That's almost like a Simpson-esque or a South Park notion, isn't it?
Because it is, and it's also I like the simplicity that you would tell it to anybody. Hey, when you do that numbers accounting over there, don't fuck it up.
Yeah.
Your goal is don't suck, don't fuck it up.
Yeah. There's another one which There's another one which is very in the same family, and that is sometimes I've been working with a band where they're trying to get through a track and make it all make sense. And the minute someone forgets what they're doing or goes wrong, they present a body language which suggests everyone has to stop. While we're working this out, we got to a point where it's gone wrong. We have to stop and analyze and discuss. And there are times when you don't want that. You want the band to play it from beginning to end, irrespective of how ropey it might be, just so they're getting through it and it's making a sense. And that is, if you fuck up, catch up. And I've said that many times. I just need you to get through this piece from beginning to end.
And it's a jazz thing.
Try and be perfect, and just get through it, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I think it's a jazz thing. I remember two things were very important to me as a young person. Seeing Ornette Coleman Quartet with Don Cherry turning clams into musical ideas. Right?
Fantastic.
And the other is seeing Michael Brecker Quintet with Jack on drums, and Jack's dropping sticks. He's literally like playing so loose that sticks are falling, and he doesn't bat an eyelash because you're going to continue. You have to continue.
Yeah.
That taught me a lot.
I bet.
Jack's dropping sticks. He's human. He's just trying to keep going. Okay. Yeah. Wow, what a lesson.
Actually it's quite liberating to be able to see someone that great be so not bothered, because what they're doing might create stick droppage. What a wonderful place to be, where you're dropping sticks and it's all part of something and it doesn't matter and it's great.
Yeah.
That's not precious, isn't it? That's the antithesis of being precious.
Yes. Not precious is important. You're right.
Yeah. Or over fastidious, where it's just kind of lost its kind of, that's part of Vinny's, don't overthink it. Yeah.
And then like when I was doing archival, really sort of, I was being mentored by Bob Belden, who did all the Miles box sets, etc.
Oh yeah.
Joe Zawinul said to him, when you look at this, when you listen to this stuff, just take all the shit that's not happening. and he knew shit that was in there that wasn't happening.
Yeah.
So, but they didn't care. They just like, we had to get through some shit that wasn't happening to get to the shit that was happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and Weather Report would go out, they'd play free and shit wouldn't always jump off, but they didn't care.
Yeah. Sensational band though. I mean, their records, I think I have them all, you know, unbelievable band, you know.
I think one must have them all.
That's the law.
It is in this house, yeah.
Yeah, and quite a lot. I have to say, quite a lot of the pre-Jacko stuff, to be honest.
Yep.
Miroslav, and there's a bunch of those guys which just. And
I saw the Jocko band before he was self-aware, and it was actually quite amazing.
Yeah. I saw them in 70. Where was it? I saw them in San Francisco. I may have been 76. That period of time. So what year do we know when Jacko?
He starts in 75.
I saw him in 76. Is my reckoning, in San Francisco, and you know he wasn't quite doing the Hendrixy bit of his shtick, as it were. He was just a tour de force. It was phenomenal. Yeah,
and also I saw him when he played with his back to the audience, and you didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah,
because he was looking at the band.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I love Alphonso Johnson and all the early percussionists and drummers and
Dom Romeo and Eric Gravatt. Those guys blew me away. Boogie Woogie Waltz off Street Night. That's immense, that piece of work.
Yeah, but I think all of the kinds of improvs that I'm referring to include how we heard Weather Report create from nothing and try to make something happen and recognize when it was happening. And then when it wasn't, they could move to something else. Like it's a post-Miles thing, let's face it.
Yes.
But that methodology is
generally tidier than Miles.
It is, oh yeah.
You know.
Well, yeah. But also in some ways more complex.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Miles really kind of had a couple of grooves that he liked, you know, at that point, you know.
Yes.
And then Joe's important because of all the world music that he brings in.
Yeah. Yeah. And also another thing I think is Wayne Shorter's playing throughout Weather Report. The economics of what he does is astounding. The amount he's not playing. And then when he does, you go, oh my goodness. How beautiful is that playing?
I saw one of Wayne's, I mean, we're kind of sure he's not going to play anymore, but I saw one of his last gigs on the East Coast, and he wasn't playing much because he was playing a lot less. But the band is playing, and he's sitting there, and he just brought in one long note.
Yeah.
And it just changed everything.
Yeah.
And then he stopped and he sat there. And he didn't play for a while. And it's that thing, the economy, knowing one shape that will fit into this melee of things, you know, like the one that's like that bell thing I was saying, like,
yeah,
maybe just the one thing here is just to go ding, you know. Yeah. And he would just go, ah, and that was it.
Yeah.
But the tone of it actually, to be more detailed, sounded like an English horn. It didn't sound like soprano, because he could change, you know, the tone.
Yeah.
Oh, I could talk about Weather Report too forever, but Kris, what a blast, man.
Fantastic. I got to say, wonderful meeting you. Lovely, lovely, lovely meeting you and chatting.
Right back at you.
Oh man, I mean, maybe off record we need to do more, because I feel I could interview you for a week. There's just so much stuff.
Well, we have a lot.
You have so much stuff to talk about and express. It's so brilliant, you know. And I said it when I first met you, your room. That's just a glimpse, you know. Fantastic.
This is all the stuff that I love.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know. Thank you, Kris.
No, thank you. Thank you. When you see Greggsy, give him my love.
I will.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll speak at some point soon.
No, we will.
Yeah.
We'll say goodbye to the listeners for now, but hang on, and we'll chat a little bit after. Everybody, thank you for listening. Kris Merrick Hughes, the man, the legend, and we are having so much fun here. We're gonna just gonna call it for the day, but Kris will be back, I hope. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.